Once again, welcome to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome a new contributor. Her name is Samantha Dagres. And Samantha, in addition to being a Young Voices contributor, I'm sure that you wear a few other hats as well. Take a moment to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, hi, Brian. Glad to be on. In addition to being a Young contributor, I am a communications advisor for the Montreal Economic Institute. We are a Montreal-based think tank that deals in public policy, Canadian public policy, and public policy from all over the country.
Very good. And you have a remarkable article in the Toronto Sun that unfortunately does not have a lot of good news, economically speaking. The subheadline here talks about Canada is projected to have the worst growth over the next few decades among 38 advanced economies. Talk to me about why that prognosis is grim.
Well, the prognosis is grim because it means that, the economy won't be growing, wages won't be increasing, and young people won't be availing themselves of the opportunities they should be. Basically, productivity in Canada is at crisis levels. That's not according to me. It's according to the Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, who announced last March that we are in crisis area and that we should break glass. And what this means, productivity basically relates to the value created for our work. So just to give people a more tangible sense of what that is, in Canada, the average worker creates about $53 US per hour. If we compare this to our G7, other G7 countries, the average there is around $63 an hour. And American workers actually produce $72 per hour. So we see a great discrepancy there in terms of how much Canadian workers are producing versus their American counterparts.
And you make the case in your article, this is important because productivity is profit. This is the value that these workers are creating. This is what drives economic growth. I have to ask, what is it that's putting the brakes on economic growth or holding back that productivity?
Well, there are two ways that a halt in productivity would occur. It's one, if workers stop working as much, and we know that's the case. The other way is that if business investment is ceding, which is the case in Canada, business investment has declined over 7% since 2014. Although in the United States, it's up 33%. So the main problem in Canada is that we're not getting the investment we need to give workers the tools they need to unleash their full potential.
And how does that investment come? I'm sorry, I feel like a complete novice, but I really don't understand. How do you woo investors, to come and spend their money in Canada?
Simply, it's low taxes. It's a business environment that's friendly to investment, because when investors are looking at jurisdictions to invest in, they're looking to make a big risk, and they're looking for that payout to be substantial. And what the Trudeau government just recently did was increase the capital gain inclusion rate to 2/3, which means if you make $1 of profit, 66.7% of that will be taxed. So if you're evaluating where you're going to put your money, you might go to a lower tax jurisdiction like the United States, where the capital gains around 20% than Canada, right? It's numbers, it's profits at the end of the day, and if Canada wants to really position itself compared to other G7 countries, we need to have a tax environment that's favorable to people making profits, to people succeeding.
And Samantha, let's talk about this specifically too, as it relates to, for instance, Gen Z. How is this affecting young Canadians who might want to be entrepreneurs, but it sounds like this puts some pretty significant roadblocks in their way?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge dissuasion to entering, entrepreneurship, innovation, and starting a business. right? The way I like to see it is that, if you and I are graduating from the same university program, we have the same experience. You live in the States, I live in Canada, and we're both writers, and we sit down on our first day of work, and my company provides me with a laptop and your company provides you with a typewriter. Well, even though we have the same skills, I'm going to be a lot more efficient than you are. And that's basically what it comes down to when we talk about the lack of investment, because if you're not sitting next to the top technology, cutting edge machinery, well, ultimately at the end of the day, you're going to be less efficient. And the reason this is really important for young workers, especially starting their careers, but workers in general, is that if you produce $100 per hour, well, that gives you a lot of negotiating power with your employer, because you're really, really valuable. If at the end of the day you create $10 per hour, well, that caps your wages at $10. No one's going to pay you $12. So if our productivity remains low, then unfortunately our wages will, and at the end of the day, that translates to worse standards of living.
So, not to put this all on you, and not that it can be simplified in a 2-minute answer here, but what are the likely solutions? Do you start by lowering the tax rates, or even getting rid of certain taxes?
Absolutely. I mean, we need a full reversal of the recent capital gains tax increase, especially. It's unconscionable to me, honestly, that a government can see a sluggish economy, worse growth projections in the OECD, and say, you know what, we're going to make it even harder to succeed in this country. So absolutely lower taxes, and also deregulate. To get any project off the ground, regulation is a cost to getting started. In Canada, you have municipal governments, you have provincial governments, you have federal governments, you have environmental oversight. If it takes you a year longer to start a project here than the United States, well, that's a whole year that you're paying for getting through the process. And so really simplifying regulation, lowering taxes, and I think we'd be better off.
And while I have you here, I want to get your thoughts on home ownership in Canada. Right now, in the United States, I know that it's looking pretty dismal. Younger people are not feeling very optimistic that they'll ever be able to afford a home. What is the situation like in Canada?
It's pretty dire. Most young people I know have resolved themselves to never being able to own a home. As I mentioned in my article, many Canadians want to start families, can't start families. Usually that's tethered to being able to buy a home. And again, this can be laid at the feet of regulators, of city councils that just overregulate zoning, and make it so much harder for developers to build. Because at the end of the day, the housing shortage is a matter of supply and demand. You have all this demand and no supply. Governments think that they can, tweak around the edges and make proclamations about social housing and about how developers just want to make money. But at the end of the day, if they allowed developers to build, supply would increase, and that would meet demand, and housing costs would go down.
So I guess the final question in the minute that we have left, how likely are those who hold political power to listen to these needs? Are they committed to the course that they're on, or are there some who are listening to reason?
Well, we hope that the Conservative Party of Canada, which seems to be poised to win the next election, October 2025, will lower these taxes. But overall, there hasn't been overtures of this nature that any government will come around and really make Canada a better place to do business, and a better place for people to just be able to take risks and follow their dream. And it's really a matter of, do you want to allow people to play out their ambitions, to see their dreams through? And our government, either by making it impossible, they're either saying, we don't think that Canadians have it in them to be successful, or, you know what, we don't care. We don't want them to be.
Thank you so much again. We are talking with Samantha Dagres. That sounds like a pretty long uphill walk, but I think you're a good representation of the kind of can-do individuals who could turn that around. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to find you on social media, where can they do that? They
can find me on Twitter, Sam_Dagres. And if they're interested in the work we do and the studies we publish on subjects like public finances, they can find us at the Montreal Economic Institute, and we're on all social medias.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We are happy to welcome Oliver Dean back to the program. Oliver, nice to have you on the show again. For those meeting you for the first time, take just a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, firstly, Brian, great to be here. I'm Oliver, second year London School of Economics student studying history and politics, involved in a lot of societies there and offering my insight in politics, economics, public policy, and those sorts of fields.
And today we got a topic that has actually been on a lot of people's minds if they've been following the news. I have seen a lot of coverage of the riots going on in the UK pertaining to immigration, but you have an article here in the Express that says the focus on those riots is actually forgetting the real problem, which is knife crime. Talk to me a little bit about, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the riots that are going on. Obviously, you're getting a lot of attention. Is the knife crime part of the problem, or is it a totally separate issue that's being ignored?
Yeah, so I would argue that knife crime is actually what caused these riots to occur in the first place. So in July, a 17-year-old walked into a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. He fatally stabbed 3 children and then inflicted stab wounds upon another 8. And this got sensationalized amongst far-right circles, extremist circles, and they capitalized on it by pushing the narrative that he was an immigrant and that this should be an argument about immigration. But my point is that if there were tougher knife crime laws to clamp down on knife crime and to prevent this from happening in the first place, these riots would not have occurred.
Wow. Now, I know that the UK has been very, very strict in terms of enforcing, not people not having firearms or not being able to have access to firearms. Has that pushed more people in the direction of edged weapons?
I mean, there's not necessarily any studies that delve into this, but you would assume that if there is a smaller market for firearms, then people are going to turn to the next best thing if they're intending to cause harm onto other people. And so, we would assume that has contributed to the increase in knife crime.
So let's talk about some of the numbers behind, just to illustrate how this is an epidemic, this knife crime.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2010, when the Conservatives first came into power, there were around 30 to 40,000 incidents involving a knife or a bladed article per year. Now, when we got to 2019, this had increased by more than 15,000. And coupled with this, we saw a drop of roughly 14% in the number of police officers across the UK. And so there has been this vacuum wherein criminal gangs and gangs who are using knives as their weapons have basically pushed themselves into this space and laid siege to our streets. And a lot of people are scared to go outside. They're scared to go shopping because of this fear of knife crime. And what we've also seen is the previous Conservative government also cuts the number of police community support officers, which were seen as vital to helping deter young people from entering into knife crime. And the Labour government, which won power in July, has pledged to take knives off our streets and to actually reclaim our streets from these criminal gangs. And they've got some ideas on how they're going to do it, but because their government is so young, they've not really had the time to implement these policies properly.
What are some of the existing laws that exist to limit the number of knives out there on the streets?
Well, this is one of the big things, and so one of the main things that is there to stop young people and people more generally from taking on knives is the minimum sentencing for people carrying knives. So currently in the UK, this stands at 6 months. So if you are stopped and searched by the police in public and you're found to be carrying a knife or another bladed article, you will face a minimum of 6 months in prison. Now, my argument is that this is not nearly sufficient time to rehabilitate any criminal, let alone a criminal who is wielding a knife and is intending to cause harm onto another person. I think we have to recognize that people aren't wandering the streets of the UK carrying knives because it's a fashion statement. They're carrying knives because they're intending to cause harm to people, or they're intending to defend themselves from other people who are also carrying bladed weapons and knives. And so one of the things that I've actually suggested in the article is that if we raise the minimum sentencing from something from 6 months to something like a year, 18 months, or even 2 years, this can act as a strong deterrent to prevent criminals from taking up knives in the first place.
Tell me about the self-defense laws in the UK. Does a person what do they have access to, or what are their rights or responsibilities when it comes to protecting themselves from criminals who intend to do them harm?
Well, I'm not particularly an expert in the legal field here, but what I can say is that it doesn't matter whether you're trying to, impose self-defense. You cannot carry a knife in public. That's an immediate no. It doesn't matter if you're trying to defend yourself from other people who you think may be wielding knives, who you think may be carrying knives. If you are carrying a knife in public, and if it's for self-defense, if it's for hurting another person, if it's just, for, even maybe a fashion statement, I don't know. You can't carry a knife for self-defense purposes. That much is clear.
And what kind of limitations are there? I mean, are we talking even so much as a pocket knife?
Yeah, any bladed article that could cause harm to somebody else is a no in the eyes of British law.
Wow. I only say wow because, certainly there are some knives that are of utility, and, I'm thinking primarily of pocket knives, but it sounds like the effort here is to limit access to those bladed weapons, across the board. Does this affect people when they buy kitchen cutlery, for instance?
Yes. So when you go into a store and you're trying to purchase a knife, you have to prove to the shop assistant or the cashier that you are over 18. Obviously, that means that you could go out and you can buy a kitchen knife, and that can be fine. But if you're essentially stopped by the police and they search you and you're found to be carrying a knife, and it's assumed by the police that you're carrying that knife with intent to cause harm onto somebody else or something along those lines, then it becomes a different question. Very
interesting. I'm just, in my mind's eye, I'm picturing a chef who's traveling to or from his job, with his roll of kitchen knives with him, and doesn't sound like that would be a good idea for him.
I mean, I would assume that in that situation, the police would recognize that, yes, he has a reason to be carrying that knife. But if you've got a young person on the street who has no reason to be carrying a knife in the first place, and perhaps is known to be associated with gangs in the local area, then the police would assume in that situation that the reason they're carrying a knife is for more deadly purposes.
Something you point out in your article is that the problem of knife crime should not be politicized. And does this have to do with stereotyping? Well, the immigrants are the ones who either tend to favor knives or tend to engage in knife crime. Talk to me a little bit about how that issue becomes politicized.
Yeah, and you touch on immigration. There's also the matter of age. There's also the matter of income levels. So a study published by King's College London revealed that students and young people from poorer backgrounds are more likely to take up knife crime and gang violence. And so my argument is that this issue shouldn't be politicized. The more we politicize it, and the more we put off talking about real, meaningful change, the more people are going to die on our streets. I mean, if you look at UK headlines within the last few weeks, we had a stabbing in Manchester, we've had a stabbing in Leeds, and just recently we had a stabbing at the Notting Hill Festival in London. There are so many examples. It's essentially becoming normalized within British society, and the Labour government needs to take charge and lay down the law and make sure that there are strong deterrents in place to stop knife crime from becoming normalized.
Again, we are talking with Oliver Dean. He is a political commentator with Young Voices UK. Oliver, for people who wish to follow your work or to find you on social media, where would they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn and you can find me on X.
Very good. Thanks for keeping us up to date, and thanks for informing us. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you very much, Bryan. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our final segment today. Happy to welcome Ryan Silverstein back to the program. Ryan, it's good to have you on again. For those meeting you for the first time, take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a JD candidate at Villanova University, and I'm a fellow with Villanova's McClellan Center for Law, Religion, and Public Policy.
Very good. So we're going to talk about student loan forgiveness. Now, I've heard about this quite a bit in the last couple of years, but your article for DC Journal says Biden misses on student loan forgiveness again. And I know the Supreme Court at least once has said, nope, that's not going to pass muster. Tell me what's happened this latest time.
Yeah, so the first time, the Supreme Court specifically, the Biden administration, the first time around, they relied on something called the HEROES Act, which effectively was, hey, during 9/11, we want the kids whose parents perished 9/11 or whose parents were first responders to 9/11, we want them to be able to go to college. So the Biden administration used the HEROES Act to say, well, hey, this actually applies to all emergencies, and therefore we're going to cancel student debt for all students because of COVID, because COVID's an emergency. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's not possible. That's just not possible. This time around, the administration decided to be a little different. They created something called it's called the Saving on Valuable Education Plan, the SAVE plan. And they did that because they want to cancel people's loans. And they're relying on the Higher Education Act of 1965, which specifically says that the Secretary of Education can modify student loans. It doesn't say cancel, it says modify, which is interesting. It's a really interesting point because for some reason, lefties have convinced themselves that, the power to modify is the power to cancel. And that's not the same thing. A modified obligation is not a canceled obligation. And at the Court of Appeal, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, they recognize that in their decision. The district court also recognized that the Eighth Circuit specifically said there's no statutory authority here for you to issue this regulation, for you to cancel the loans, mainly because these states, which actually have accredited agencies that give out these student loans, are going to suffer harm from it. So you're depriving states of money essentially without due process, which is a problem, a very big problem.
Interesting. I mean, you would think after getting slapped down once by the Supreme Court that Biden would have thought twice about trying it again. And maybe this is just, the part of me that doesn't really care for politicians, but was it just an attempt to buy votes?
I think buying votes is actually a bad way to put it, because that's not what he wants. Student loan forgiveness is wildly unpopular. According to a study by the Cato Institute, 76% of Americans actually are against student loan forgiveness if it leads to an increase in taxes, which is more likely than not what has to be done to forgive these student loans. So what's the result then? Biden doesn't want it because it's unpopular. Members of his own party don't want it because it's unpopular. But he ran on it in 2020 to get young people to vote for him. So it's not that Biden is trying to buy votes. He's trying to preserve the issue by using the regulatory process.
Okay, that makes sense. And actually, I can kind of see what he's doing, even if I still vehemently disagree with it. So where does it stand at this point? The people who are counting on, well, my student loans are going to be forgiven, does that mean they're still on the hook to pay those loans back?
It depends on what program you're getting your loans forgiven from. I mean, if you are trying to get your loans forgiven under the SAVE plan, that's probably not going to be forgiven for now. That's still being litigated. So right now, all of their loans were put into forbearance by the Department of Education for the foreseeable future because of litigation. Now, if you qualify for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which is a different program, you can still get your loans forgiven under that. That has a program that's been consistently been understaffed. It's been a bureaucratic mess. The administration's been trying to fix it, and they've done, I think, a pretty good job at fixing the administrative side of that. So definitely try and get your loans forgiven under that program, PSLF. If you are a cop, if you served in the military, if you're a nurse, if you're doing public interest work like in law, if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, you can qualify for the PSLF, but you can't qualify for the SAVE program because right now it's still being litigated.
So does this help or hurt Kamala Harris in her bid for the presidency?
I would definitely say this helps her because at the end of the day, Biden gets to say like, hey, student loans still on the table. Kamala Harris can say, hey guys, look, student loans still on the table. I'll get them, even though my predecessor promised you them 4 years ago and still hasn't gotten you them. I'll give them to you. Just put me in power. And you see, it's not me that's the problem. It's not the administration that's the problem. It's those radical right-wing judges who don't do what we want. If only they did what we wanted.
Yeah, that sounds pretty plausible, at least for what she might say. Now, what about Congress? What role, if any, do they play in either heading this off or furthering it?
So firstly, there are two ways I think Congress could handle this. I think the first way Congress could handle this is, well, since they have power of the purse, they could straight up pass a federal law that says, hey, we're forgiving the debt or transferring the debt or in some way dealing with the debt that relieves the burden from people who hold student loans. Or the second way they could do it is they could actually pass an administrative remedy. What I mean by this is when an administrative agency, they issue a regulation, the agency has to point to the statutory law from which they derive their authority for that regulation. So Congress can pass a law that says the Secretary of Education has the power to forgive loans. Once that statute is passed into law, then the Secretary of Education can point to that statute and say, see that, I can forgive loans now, whenever I see fit.
Interesting. So does this affect the judiciary in any way, shape, or form? Are we going to see calls for, we need to, appoint more judges who are sympathetic to this or pack the Supreme Court or something like that?
Well, I mean, I think we've already seen it. It's no mistake that I think 1 week after Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race, he penned this opinion for the Washington Post saying we need to expand the court. They've already been calling for it for years, and they're continuing to use progressive initiatives like student loan forgiveness to really badger the judiciary because they aren't getting their way.
Wow. So I'm curious, in the larger picture, student loan debt, I think, is a real problem. And I say that from the standpoint of people are taking on backbreaking amounts of debt, thanks to banks, colluding with institutions of higher learning. And true, nobody holds a gun to their head to make them sign those loan papers, but the people who take on those debts feel like they can't move ahead without a good education, and it costs a lot of money. It feels to me like they're caught in a bit of a trap. And I'm wondering if there's any stomach for reform in terms of how student loans are administered in the first place, so we don't have to look for fallback positions to forgive that debt.
Yeah, well, I think in the first place, the first thing we actually have to do is stop encouraging people to go to college, right? College isn't for everyone. We still have students going to college to study like the language of dance, for example. Like, why would you major in that? Go study STEM, right? So we need people studying degrees that actually have good degree outcomes, number one. And I think number two, we need to start really restricting how many loans the federal government actually gives out to students because it's artificially driving up the price of college.
Yeah, there's something about that for quite a few years. It really hasn't passed the sniff test, but it seems like a lot of people still buy into the idea, but I can't really get a good job if I don't have this degree. At least that's what the person serving coffee down at, Starbucks is telling people, with their degree. Ryan, anything else that you would like to tell us about this issue or any resources that people might access to be better informed about, student loan forgiveness?
Well, yeah, firstly, I think people should just look at the public service loan forgiveness program. I think that's a really good program because unlike the other degree programs, you can work in a Chapter 10 school, you can go be a nurse, you can do public interest work. And if you do that for enough time, your loans will get paid back. It's not just you're paid back forgiven. Your loans are forgiven after serving the public and the common good, which is a good thing. Number two, I would actually encourage states to follow the lead of Governor Josh Shapiro, which is start eliminating degree requirements for government jobs. Not every job needs a college degree, and we need to cut back on degree inflation, and that's a great way to do it.
Well, and something you said that I know would shock some people, but I believe it's absolutely true, and that is college is not for everybody. And, a person who goes out and learns a trade is not in any way, taking a step down to second-class citizenship. We need people in trades. We need people in academia. And anyway, I thought you were wise to say that. So Ryan,
Thank you. Frankly, I do agree.
Tell us where people can follow you on social media. Tell us where they can find your work.
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can actually see my latest piece, which came out today in the New York Daily News on New York's Proposition 1. Highly recommend people read that. They can follow my Twitter, Ryan916. And that's it. That's where you can find my work. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks again. Talking with Ryan Silverstein.